The galaxy had seen many wars, but it had forgotten what real soldiers looked like for hundreds of years because most races had given up the old way of fighting and now trusted machines and drones to fight in their place. So when the Krex Dominion invaded the small world of Elnar, the Galactic Union panicked. They sent messages asking for help from every system, but most fleets were too far and too slow. The Krex were fast, cruel, and they believed no one in the galaxy could stop them. The Elnarians were peaceful and proud people. They built art cities and shining towers, but they did not have strong armies. They tried to fight back, but their ships were burned in orbit. Their armies scattered, and their cities turned into ash. They begged the Union for soldiers, but the Union only promised support later. When things calmed down, they were still debating when the first human fleet arrived quietly without ceremony or announcement. The Elnarian leaders did not understand it at first. The human ships looked old compared to the sleek silver Union craft. They were painted gray and black. They carried no banners or glowing shields. They moved with purpose, not beauty. Colonel Ethan Brooks stood on the command deck of the lead ship. His eyes, calm, his uniform. Simple, no medals, no bright colors. He was a tall man with a weathered face and quiet voice. Next to him stood Captain Maria Lewis, focused on the battle map around them. Officers worked in silence. No shouting, no panic. Every movement seemed planned. They had done this before. When the call from Elnar came, the humans did not ask for orders. They simply said, "We are on our way," and they came through the jump gate in formation. The Elnarian commander Lurak could not believe it. He asked, "Where is your Union authorization?" Colonel Brooks only said, "We are not waiting for permission, we are here to help," and the channel went silent. On the surface of Elnar, the situation was chaos. The Krex had landed heavy units in the capital plains, burning everything that resisted. Civilians were running toward the mountains, desperate to survive. When the first human dropships entered the atmosphere, the sky turned red from their re-entry. The Elnarians thought it was more Krex fire. Then they saw the symbols of Earth painted on the side, and they realized someone had come for them. Sergeant Adam Clark led the first unit to land. His boots hit the blackened soil and the dust rose around him. The air smelled of fire and metal. He spoke softly to his squad, no fear in his tone. "Move in formation. Check your corners, watch the ridges." They advanced in silence through the ruins of a village. The Krex patrols were there, waiting, armed with plasma rifles, taller and stronger than humans, but slower. The first firefight was over in seconds. Human rifles cracked in short bursts, precise, deadly. The Krex fell before they even saw where the shots came from. Drones followed behind, scanning the area. Medics ran forward as soon as it was safe. Treating the wounded Elnarians, one medic named Kelly Moore stayed behind with a child whose arm was burned. She whispered, "You are safe now," and the child looked at her like she was from another world. Colonel Brooks watched the feed from orbit and gave quiet orders. He did not sound proud or angry. His voice was steady. "We move sector by sector. No rush. We are not here to win a day. We are here to hold a world." The Krex command ship in orbit intercepted human transmissions and laughed. They did not believe this small force could stop them. They called humans soft and weak. They said they hid behind words and counsels. But on the 4th hour of battle, the Krex laughter ended. Their forward units had disappeared. Every communication cut off. They sent drones to find them. The drones showed images of human soldiers moving in coordinated groups, taking positions, building defenses faster than machines could react. Every move synchronized, every step planned. They did not fight like desperate animals. They fought like a machine made of flesh and will. The Elnarian survivors could not understand how the humans stayed calm, even when shells exploded near them. Captain Lewis called in air support, and human aircraft streaked through the clouds. Their missiles hit targets exactly where she marked them. There was no cheering, no shouting after the hits, only quick confirmation of damage reports and preparation for the next strike. Sergeant Clark's squad entered a burned school building where the Krex had taken hostages. They moved room by room, silent and careful. When they found the prisoners, they used hand signals. No loud words. The Krex never saw them coming. And when it was over, Clark simply said, "Area clear." That night, the Elnarian Leader Lurak sent a request to speak with the human commander. He wanted to thank them. He expected a formal meeting, but Brooks appeared on the screen in his combat gear, dirt on his face. His tone even. "We will continue until your cities are free." Lurak said, "You fight like no one I have ever seen. What drives your people?" And Brooks paused before answering, "Training. We are trained to protect life, and we do it until the job is done." In the orbiting ship, Maria Lewis looked at the casualty report. Small numbers compared to what they expected, she whispered to herself. They held the line again. She had seen many battles before on dead worlds where no one was left to thank them. But this one felt different because the Elnarians were still alive, still watching and learning what humans really were. The Kreks began to panic as the human defense net expanded every time they tried to flank. They found humans waiting every time they bombarded an area the humans had already moved. Their logistics were faster than any system in the Union. Their communication almost telepathic, built on trust and discipline. During the 6th day of the campaign, the Kreks brought in reinforcements. Heavy walkers larger than houses the Elnarians thought it was the end, but the humans did not retreat. Instead, they called down an orbital strike precisely timed while the infantry advanced under cover. They never ran, they never broke formation. The ground shook and dust covered the sky. When it cleared, the Kreks machines were burning and human flags stood in the rubble. The Elnarians started to call them the Iron Ones because they never seemed to stop no matter what came their way. When the sun set that evening, the battlefield was quiet. The humans sat together, cleaning their weapons, talking softly. No music, no joy, just calm purpose. They shared food with Elnarian civilians who had survived. Some of them smiled for the first time in weeks. A small girl gave Sergeant Clark a flower, and he placed it gently in his armor pocket. He said, "Keep it safe, we still have a long way to go." And she nodded, not understanding his words, but feeling the warmth in them. Colonel Brooks stood at the edge of the command post, looking over the smoking horizon. He knew this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would be harder. But he also knew something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, that a true professional army was not built on power or rage. It was built on discipline, courage, and the quiet promise that, no matter how dark the world became, they would stand between the weak and the fire. The Elnarians watched them that night from a distance. Some whispered that the humans must be born for war, but one old scholar said no, they are not born for it. They are shaped by it, and they choose to master it so it will never master them again. And as the stars rose over the wounded planet Elnar, the galaxy began to see what it had not seen in centuries, not machines, not mercenaries, not frightened conscripts, but real soldiers who carried not just weapons but purpose. And from that moment, even the enemies of humanity began to feel a quiet unease, because they realized they were not fighting men and women seeking conquest. They were facing professionals who had come to do a job and who would not stop until it was done. The morning after the first great push was silent. The wind moved through the broken buildings of the Elnar capital, carrying the smell of smoke and metal. The city was half in ruins, but still alive. Because of the humans, they had turned the central square into a command post with tents made from armored fabric and bright field lights that pushed back the darkness. Colonel Ethan Brooks stood in the middle looking at a screen showing troop movements. His expression never changed, but inside his chest he could feel the weight of what was coming. He had seen wars end and begin again too many times, and he knew the Kreks were not finished. They were regrouping far beyond the hills, building new lines with heavier weapons. And they would come again. Captain Maria Lewis came to him with a report. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, but she did not seem to notice. She said, "We have secured the Western Bloc and the refugees are being moved to safety." Brooks nodded. "Good, keep them away." From the front, she hesitated before speaking again. "The locals, they keep asking how long we will stay." He looked at her and answered, "As long as it takes. They will not fall again because we were too quick to leave." Outside the command post, Sergeant Adam Clark led his squad through the narrow streets, checking for any remaining Krek scouts. The buildings were gray and cracked. One wall had the burned symbol of the Kreks carved into it. Clark touched it with his glove and said quietly, "Not anymore." Behind him, Private Laura Green carried a communication pack twice her size, sweat running down her face. She smiled faintly and said, "I think they are afraid of us now." Clark said, "Good, let them be." It saves bullets. They moved toward the industrial district where a group of Elnarians had reported strange noises. They found a group of civilians hiding in a storage tunnel. Children clutching small toys and food packets. One of them tried to stand but fell from weakness. Clark called the medic over and knelt beside them, his voice calm. "We are not here to hurt you, we are here to help." The Elnarian elder looked at his face and said, "We thought all soldiers were like the Kreks." And Clark shook his head and said, "Then you have never seen a real one before." In orbit, the human fleet watched the planet below ships in perfect formation, unmoving like statues inside one of them. Maria checked the long-range scanners. The Kreks fleet was reforming at the edge of the system, hundreds of ships gathering. Like a storm, she knew what it meant. They were preparing to strike again, but humans were already preparing too. She ordered the engineers to move satellites into position and to link the orbital guns with ground forces. The humans believed in one rule: always be ready before the enemy decides you are not. Down below, the Elnarians began to rebuild their shelters with help from human engineers. Machines moved fast, but the humans moved faster. They lifted debris, carried beams, welded metal with tools made to work even in storms. A young Elnarian named Varek asked one of the soldiers, "How can you work so long without rest?" And the man smiled and said, "Habit. We train to keep moving when others stop. It keeps us alive." When night came again, the horizon glowed with the light of Krek ships entering the atmosphere. Their invasion pods fell like red comets. The ground shook, alarms screamed, and every human unit moved at once. No confusion, no delay. Their training showed again in every motion. Colonel Brooks gave a single order: "Hold the line." Captain Lewis relayed it, and every squad across the capital repeated the same words without fear: "Hold the line." The Kreks attack began with bombardments. Plasma fire tore across the city, destroying what was left of towers and walls. But the humans were already underground in prepared tunnels. They had mapped the area days before, expecting this attack. When the Kreks advanced, they met empty streets and hidden mines. Then the humans struck from the sides with perfect timing: grenades, flash charges, and focused fire. The Kreks were larger but slower. They roared and fired wildly, but the humans moved like shadows in and out of cover. Their coordination frightened the enemy. Sergeant Clark's squad held the eastern road. He could see the silhouettes of Krek soldiers moving through smoke. He whispered to his team, "Wait for my mark." When the first one stepped forward, Clark fired once. Then the others followed in a storm of controlled bursts. The air filled with dust and sparks. Private Green reloaded and said softly, "This is madness." Clark replied, "No. This is work." And they kept firing until the road was theirs again. On the other side of the city, Maria directed drone strikes, her calm voice steady through the chaos. "Adjust to Grid 9, repeat." Grid 9, the drones descended and fire lit the night. The Elnarians hiding in the shelters could feel the ground tremble, but they also heard human voices through the radios telling them to stay calm, to wait for the signal to come out when it was safe. Hours later, the first Kreks wave was broken. Their commanders, furious, sent new troops, but morale was gone. They had never faced soldiers who refused to give up or panic. The Kreks were used to fast victories, but here they met walls made of human will and skill. When the sun rose again, Elnar was covered in smoke, but the human banners still stood. Colonel Brooks walked among his troops, checking every position. He did not smile. He did not rest. He only said, "Good work now." Reinforce the north. They obeyed without hesitation. One of the young Elnarian officers approached him. Her name was Lyra. She said, "How do you do it? How do you fight like this, day after day?" He looked at her tired eyes and said, "Because someone has to," and walked away. In the following days, the humans built stronger defenses and began training Elnarian volunteers. They taught them how to aim, how to move, how to protect each other. It was not grand speeches or parades, just quiet teaching and patience. The Elnarians respected that they saw how humans treated even the smallest task as important, how every soldier, no matter rank, took care of their gear and their people. At night, the campfires burned in small circles, humans and Elnarians sitting together, eating rations, sharing stories. One Elnarian boy asked Sergeant Clark why he became a soldier. Clark looked into the fire and said, I saw what happens when no one stands up. So I chose to stand. And the boy nodded, as if he understood. Meanwhile, far away, the Krex warlords met in secret. Furious that their campaign had turned against them, they sent messages across the Dominion warning that humans were dangerous. One of them said they fight like machines, but think like hunters. Another said they are not afraid of dying. And the oldest of them said they do not come for conquest, they come for order, and that makes them unstoppable. On Elnar, the humans kept working even as the reports of new Krex fleets arrived. They did not celebrate or rest. They sharpened their tools and strengthened their hearts. Captain Lewis stood by the window of her command room watching the stars. She whispered quietly, "We are just doing our duty." But even she knew that something greater was happening. Something that would echo through the galaxy, because every planet, every fleet, every leader who watched the Battle of Elnar was seeing something they had not seen in a long time. The power of real soldiers united by purpose, not pride. When Colonel Brooks finally allowed himself a short rest, he looked at the map glowing before him, lines of defense spreading like veins across the planet. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought about Earth, about the long history of war and sacrifice and how far humanity had come, yet how little they had changed. They still fought not for domination but for survival, and for those who could not fight. And he knew that even if the Krex brought 10 times their number, they would still face them the same way, because that was who they were. As the stars shifted above and the planet cooled under the broken clouds, Elnar became quiet again, but beneath that silence there was strength. Now there were soldiers on the ground who knew the meaning of discipline. There were civilians who had seen courage, not cruelty, and there were whispers spreading through every radio and ship in the galaxy saying the same thing: the humans had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Days passed on Elnar and the war began to change shape. The Krex no longer rushed blindly into battle. They learned to fear the gray-armored soldiers who moved with calm and purpose. Every time a Krex patrol tried to advance, it vanished within minutes. Their commanders started calling humans the Silent Death. But the humans did not care for names, they only cared about finishing the mission. Colonel Ethan Brooks sat in the command tent reading reports from the front, his face lit by the faint blue glow of the screen. Captain Maria Lewis entered carrying another data pad and said quietly, "The Krex are building new lines near the southern ridge." Brooks nodded and asked how long before they attack again. She replied, "Soon, maybe within a day. We are low on supplies, but morale is still high." Brooks looked up and said, "Then we hold." And when she left, he leaned back for a moment and whispered to himself, "We always hold." Outside the camp, the humans and Elnarians worked together to repair the city. The streets were full of smoke and rubble, but life was returning. People began planting small gardens near the shelters, and children followed soldiers carrying water buckets. Some of the soldiers smiled, though they tried to hide it. Sergeant Adam Clark walked through one of the streets with his squad checking defense posts. He stopped to talk to an Elnarian boy who had been drawing something in the dust with a stick. When the boy saw him, he held up the drawing. It was a picture of a human soldier standing between fire and a group of Elnarians. Clark knelt beside him and said, "You made him taller than he really is." The boy laughed and said he should be tall to scare the monsters. Clark smiled slightly and said he does not need height. For that far beyond the city, the Krex fleet gathered in the dark of space. Their warlord Gareth stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the glowing image of Elnar. His claws tapped against the rail as he spoke to his second-in-command. "These humans must be broken. They make others believe they are invincible if we do not crush them. Now the galaxy will see them as gods." His second replied, "But Commander, every ship we send dies before reaching the surface." Gareth growled, "Then we send more. We burn the sky until nothing lives below." He turned to his officers and said, "Prepare the total assault on Elnar." That same night, the human radar screens began to light up dozens, then hundreds of enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace. Maria watched the readings in silence and said softly, "They are bringing everything." Brooks joined her and said, "So will we." He called all units to battle stations and ordered full planetary defense activation. Within minutes, every soldier was moving every cannon. Charging, the Elnarians watched from the shelters as the sky filled with red light from re-entry fire. The ground trembled, and the humans stood in lines waiting calm and steady. Not one of them moved until the order came. Then they did not hesitate. The first wave of Krex bombardment hit hard explosions, shook the city walls, and dust fell from the ceilings, but the human communications stayed clear and steady. Every voice, professional, every instruction, short and calm. Captain Lewis directed artillery. From her position using coordinates sent from drones, her tone even while the air burned around her fire again. Adjust 3 degrees south. Repeat 3 south. Each word carried through chaos, and every time the cannons fired, the Krex lines broke. A little more, Sergeant Clark and his team were in the ruins near the southern ridge holding the narrow pass. The Krex were coming fast and heavy, their armored beasts pushing forward. Clark shouted, "Move positions," and his soldiers shifted like clockwork. Each covering the next, their weapons cracked again and again. The ridge turned into a storm of fire. Private Laura Green reloaded behind a broken wall, shouting, "I thought they would stop coming." Clark replied, "They will when they have nothing left." 2 hours passed, and still the Krex came. Their numbers endless, but their organization falling apart. They expected panic. They found discipline. They expected fear. They found control. The humans never stopped adjusting, never lost formation. When one fell, another took their place. When a line broke, they closed it again. The Elnarians hiding in the tunnels could hear the steady rhythm of battle. The sound of human resolve in orbit. The human fleet began to move into position. The Krex ships tried to surround them, but the humans had planned for this. Every formation had been calculated days before. The admiral in charge gave quiet orders, strike patterns, Echo and Delta. The human ships moved as one, firing in perfect timing, lasers cutting through enemy hulls, missiles tracking targets with surgical precision. The space above Elnar turned into a dance of fire. But every move had purpose. Every decision made by people who had spent their lives preparing for this moment. Down below, Colonel Brooks coordinated both ground and orbit. He stood unmoving as reports poured in. "We are holding at the ridge, Sir. Northern line secure, civilian shelters intact, minimal losses." He listened to each word, then answered, "Good, maintain pressure. No heroics, just the plan." His soldiers obeyed because they trusted him, because he had never failed them. At dawn, the Krex assault began to weaken. Their lines started to crumble, their ships retreating into the clouds, leaving behind burning wrecks and broken machines. When the humans advanced, they did not cheer. They moved carefully, checking for traps, clearing debris, helping wounded Elnarians out of shelters one by one. Sergeant Clark found a small Krex wounded and bleeding. He pointed his rifle, but then lowered it. The creature stared up at him, trembling. Clark said quietly, "Tell your commander we are done here," and walked away. When the last Krex signal vanished from orbit, the battlefield fell into silence. Smoke drifting through the morning light. Captain Lewis came to Brooks, her armor covered in ash. She said, "It is over for now." He nodded and said, "Good start rebuilding." He turned to look at the Elnarian city, half destroyed yet still standing. And he felt a strange kind of peace, for the first time in years, the Elnarians gathered to thank them. They brought food, water, anything they could offer. But the humans refused most of it, saying, "Keep it. You need it more." The Elnarian leader Lurak came to Brooks and said, "I have seen many wars and many armies, but never one like yours." He paused, trying to find words. "You fight without anger and without pride. You fight like it is a duty." Brooks answered quietly, "That is exactly what it is, duty. We do not fight to be remembered. We fight so others can forget what war feels like." As the sun set, the humans began their repairs again. No rest, no celebration, just work. Captain Lewis sat near the edge of the camp, writing a short message to Earth, her voice low as she recorded report. Elnar, secured civilian survival, confirmed minimal losses, request medical support and supply reinforcements. Mission continues. She ended the recording and looked at the stars, thinking how small they looked from here, and how far from home they were yet. Home did not feel distant. It felt present in every heartbeat, every voice around her. That night, the Elnarian children played near the camp again, drawing pictures of soldiers in gray armor standing against the burning sky, their laughter soft against the wind. One of them asked his mother, "Will they stay forever?" And she answered quietly, "Maybe not, but we will never forget them." In the following days, the story of Elnar began to spread through the Union ships sent messages to every world saying, the humans had saved an entire planet without losing control, without losing honor. Leaders from distant systems began to whisper about the professional army from Earth, about how they fought like no other race had ever fought before, even the Kreks. In their dark halls began to fear the sound of the word human. Colonel Brooks watched his men as they worked, knowing more battles would come. He could already feel the pull of the next mission, but for this one moment he allowed himself to look around and breathe the air of a world that was still free, because they had stood and done what needed to be done. He said to himself quietly, "This is what it means to be ready." And somewhere deep inside, the galaxy began to understand what those words truly meant. The days after the great battle were quiet but uneasy, because everyone on Elnar knew the Kreks would not give up. They had lost badly, but their pride would not allow them to retreat forever. So while the Elnarians rebuilt their homes, the humans prepared for what was coming. Colonel Ethan Brooks stood in the command center, surrounded by screens that showed the sky and the land below. His uniform was dirty, his eyes red from lack of sleep, but his mind was clear. Captain Maria Lewis entered, carrying a tablet full of reports. She said softly, "The scouts have found traces of new Kreks movement near the southern moons." Brooks nodded and said, "They are regrouping as expected. Send word to the fleet to tighten the perimeter and double the watch rotations." She hesitated, then asked, "Sir, how long do we stay if they never stop?" And Brooks answered, "As long as it takes." Outside the city, the Elnarian people worked beside human engineers, building walls stronger than before. They had learned from the soldiers how to dig trenches, how to create hidden bunkers, and how to stay calm when alarms sounded. One Elnarian man said to Sergeant Adam Clark, "You humans never stop working." And Clark smiled faintly and said, "We stop when it is safe. That is our rule." In the orbit above Elnar, the human fleet floated like gray shadows against the stars, every ship perfectly still, ready for the next command. Admiral Ryan Cooper stood by the window of the flagship, watching the dark. He had served in dozens of campaigns, but never one like this. He whispered to his second officer, "They call this peace, but peace is only the space between storms. Keep the ships ready, on the ground." Captain Lewis spent her nights walking through the camp, checking positions, speaking to soldiers. She never raised her voice, never gave long speeches. She simply asked, "Are you ready?" And every time the answer was yes. One night she found a group of young Elnarians watching from the edge of the camp. They were curious about the humans. One of them asked, "Why do you fight if this is not your world?" And she looked at him and said, "Because one day it could be, we help you, so that maybe someone will help us when it is our turn." Far away in the dark of space, the Kreks' dominion gathered its strength again. Their warlord Gareth stood before his council, his voice full of anger. He said, "The humans have made us look weak. The other races whisper their name as if it means hope. If we do not destroy them now, they will destroy our fear forever." One of his generals replied, "But Commander, their army is small, their weapons few, and yet they fight like a storm." Gareth slammed his clawed hand on the table and said, "Then we bring the storm to them." Back on Elnar, the human scanners picked up strange readings, ships moving faster than normal, entering the system from different vectors. Brooks saw the signals appear one by one and said quietly, "They are here. Tell the fleet to hold position." Captain Lewis sent messages to every unit, "Prepare for orbital engagement." Repeat, "Prepare for orbital engagement." The soldiers began to move in silence, each one knowing what to do without needing to be told. They had practiced every scenario again and again. They trusted each other completely. The Kreks fleet appeared from hyperspace. The stars vanished behind their massive hulls, their weapons charged, glowing red like burning suns. Admiral Cooper gave one calm command: "Open fire." The space around Elnar exploded into light. Human ships moved, as if controlled by one mind, their weapons striking targets with perfect accuracy. Every missile, every beam hitting where it needed to. The Kreks fired back, turning space into chaos. But the humans adapted faster, using patterns the enemy had never seen before. Small ships drew the Kreks into traps where larger vessels waited to finish them. The battle lasted hours, and when it ended, the sky was littered with the wrecks of burning Kreks ships, drifting in silence on the planet below the ground. Forces felt the rumble from orbit, but they did not stop working. They knew their fleet would hold because they always did. Sergeant Clark's team was stationed near the mountain pass protecting a convoy of civilians. He watched the horizon through his scope and saw faint flashes of light from the sky. He said to his team, "They are giving everything they have this time." Private Laura Green replied, "And so will we." As the day turned to night, the last of the Krek's ships fell from orbit, burning through the atmosphere. One massive cruiser crashed in the desert far from the city. The explosion lit the night like a second sun, and for a moment the war seemed over. But Brooks knew better. He said, "They will send ground forces before they die. They will try to take us with them." He ordered all units to defensive formation, and within minutes the human army was ready again. When the Kreks landed, their transports filled the horizon, thousands of soldiers roaring as they charged, but the humans did not flinch. Their lines held steady, their weapons already locked. The first volley from human rifles hit with such precision that the front ranks of Kreks fell before they even reached the trenches. The rest hesitated, and that hesitation cost them the battle. The humans advanced slowly, step by step, their movements mechanical, their coordination perfect. It was not rage, it was not chaos, it was skill. Every shot, every step, every word from their commanders timed like a heartbeat. "Captain." Lewis moved through the smoke, giving orders, her voice calm. She said, "Hold formation, left flank, advance medics, move now." She helped lift a wounded soldier without pause and continued forward. Her armor scarred her eyes, steady near her. Sergeant Clark fought hand to hand when ammunition ran out, using whatever he could find. When it was done, he wiped the dirt from his face and said to his team, "Area clear." After hours of fighting, the last Krek's line broke. They ran into the desert, chased by silence, not by bullets. The humans did not pursue. Brooks ordered ceasefire, and the command echoed through every unit. Ceasefire. The soldiers stopped immediately. No cheering, no anger, just quiet breathing. The wind moved over the field, carrying the smell of smoke, and thus Captain Lewis approached Brooks and said, "It is finished." He looked across the battlefield and said, "Not yet, but soon." When morning came, the Elnarians walked through what had once been their city, now half rebuilt and half scarred by war. They saw human soldiers standing guard, repairing walls, handing out food to survivors. One Elnarian woman approached Clark and said, "I never thought any being could fight like you." He answered, "We do not fight to destroy. We fight to end destruction." She touched his arm and said, "Then maybe there is hope for this galaxy after all." Later that day, the surviving Kreks were captured. They were silent, staring at their captors as if unable to understand what they were. The humans treated them like prisoners, not animals. They gave them water and medical care. Brooks ordered it personally, saying, "Discipline means mercy even when they do not deserve it." The Elnarians watched this and understood why the humans were different. Their strength was not only in weapons but in their hearts. As night fell again, the human camp was quiet, soldiers resting, cleaning gear, speaking softly among themselves. Maria sat beside Brooks outside the command tent, the air cool and still. She said, "Do you think they understand now what we are?" He answered, "Maybe, but understanding is not the same as accepting." She nodded and looked at the stars, the same stars shining over Earth, and whispered, "Maybe one day they will learn in the sky." The wrecks of Kreks. Ships continued to burn like fading stars while the human fleet held its position unmoving, waiting for the next order across the galaxy. Signals spread faster than light, messages from Elnar, telling every race that the Kreks had fallen and that the humans had done what no one else could do. They had faced an empire and stood unbroken, and somewhere far beyond the reach of any sensor or ship, leaders of other worlds read those reports in silence. Some with hope, some with fear, all with respect, because they now understood that humans did not come to conquer. They came to defend, and when they stood together, nothing in the galaxy could move them. Weeks passed after the last Kreks battle, and the world of Elnar began to breathe again. The smoke cleared from the skies, and the sound of war faded into the distance. The human army stayed not as conquerors, but as guardians, helping the people rebuild what was lost. Colonel Ethan Brooks stood at the edge of the ruined capital, watching the sunrise over the broken towers. His uniform was faded, his boots covered in dust, but his eyes were calm. Captain Maria Lewis joined him quietly and said, "The first schools are opening again. The children are back in the streets," and Brooks smiled slightly and said, "That is how you know the war is truly over, when children laugh again." The Elnarians looked at the humans differently now. Once they had feared them, now they saw them as protectors. Many of them had joined the rebuilding teams, learning from human engineers how to make structures that could stand against storms. And one Elnarian architect named Velen stood with Sergeant Adam Clark and said, "I used to think strength was only in weapons, but I was wrong." Clark answered, "Strength is also in what you build after the fight." Velen nodded and said, "Then you are stronger than I ever imagined." The news of Elnar's victory spread fast. Through the galaxy, every government, every council, every species watched the human broadcasts, showing the fields of battle, the burned ships, and the faces of the soldiers who had fought with courage and mercy. Even the Galactic Council, which once ignored humanity, now sent messages of respect and request for talks, but humanity did not rush. They had learned from history and pain. They would decide on their own terms. In orbit, the human fleet still stood guard, the great ships of steel floating. Above Elnar, like silent guardians, Admiral Ryan Cooper stayed aboard his flagship, the Horizon. He had refused to leave until every civilian was safe, every soldier accounted for. When his second officer told him the last Krex prisoners had been transferred, he finally allowed himself a deep breath. He looked at the stars and said quietly, "Tell the fleet to prepare for withdrawal. They have earned their rest down on the surface." Captain Lewis walked through the medical camp where human doctors and Elnarian healers worked together. She stopped beside a wounded Krex soldier who was bandaged and weak. The alien looked at her with confusion and said, "Why do you heal your enemy?" She answered, "Because that is what makes us human." The Krex lowered his head, unable to speak. Later that day, a large gathering took place in the rebuilt city square. Elnarian leaders and human commanders stood together before the crowd. The people cheered not for victory, but for peace. Brooks spoke to them, his voice steady and clear. He said, "We did not come here to conquer. We came because you asked for help. We stood with you because no one deserves to face darkness alone. Remember this day, not as the day the Krex fell, but as the day hope rose again." The crowd was silent for a moment, and then applause filled the air. And even those who had doubted humanity felt something new, a sense of trust. That night, as the stars shone bright above the quiet world, Brooks sat beside a small fire outside the camp. His team, around him, Clark, Green, and Lewis, sat nearby. They talked about home, about Earth, about oceans, mountains, and families waiting far away. Clark said, "I wonder if people back home will even believe what we saw here." Lewis smiled and said, "Maybe they will, not need to. Maybe it is enough that we know," Brooks added softly, "one day, the galaxy will understand what a human army really is. Not just fighters, but protectors who carry both fire and kindness in their hearts." In the following weeks, the humans began to leave one ship at a time, lifting from the ground and rising into the endless black. The Elnarian stood watching with tears and pride as the engines lit the sky. Velen stood beside Brooks and said, "Will you come back if we need you?" Brooks looked at him and said, "If you ever call, we will answer always." When the last ship was ready to depart, Brooks and Lewis took one final walk through the city. They passed rebuilt homes, new lights shining in the windows, children playing by the river, and farmers planting crops again. Maria said, "It almost feels like it was never broken." Brooks replied, "That is the best kind of victory, the one that heals instead of destroys." They reached the shuttle ramp and turned back for one last look at Elnar. The sun was rising again, golden and warm, and for a moment neither of them spoke. As the fleet left orbit, Elnar grew smaller in the viewports until it became just a blue and green sphere surrounded by stars. Admiral Cooper stood in the command deck and said, "Set course for Earth, but keep the channels open. They may need us again." His officers nodded, and the engines flared bright. The ships disappeared into the dark. Across the galaxy, the story of Elnar spread like fire worlds that once mocked. Humans now spoke their name with awe. Even those who feared them began to realize the truth that the strength of humanity was not only in their machines or their tactics, but in their hearts. They fought like no one else because they cared like no one else. They could destroy empires, but they chose instead to save worlds. The legend of the professional human army grew not from conquest but from compassion. On distant planets, young cadets in alien academies studied the recordings of Elnar. They watched the battles, the discipline, the calm voices under fire, and they whispered, "This is what it means to be human." Some races began to form their own defense units, following human methods not to dominate, but to protect the weak. The Kreks, who survived, were scattered, their empire broken. Many of them surrendered to human fleets, asking for peace for the first time in their long history. Even Gareth, the warlord who once swore to crush Earth, was found and brought before the council. When asked why he had lost, he said simply, "They fought like gods but lived like men, and we never understood how to face that." Years later, when historians told the story of Elnar, they spoke of courage and unity. They spoke of a moment when the galaxy learned something new about humans, that they were not monsters of war, but guardians who carried hope wherever they went. They said that the professional army of Earth changed the meaning of strength forever. Back on Earth, Colonel Brooks returned. To his home by the sea, he walked the quiet shore alone, thinking of the faces he had left behind, both human and alien. He knew peace would not last forever. Somewhere out there, another call for help would come, but he also knew that humanity would be ready, because that was who they were. Captain Lewis continued her service, training new recruits, teaching them not just how to fight but why to fight. She would tell them of Elnar and say, "You must always remember that victory without honor is not victory at all." Sergeant Clark returned to his family, but sometimes at night he would look at the stars and wonder if the Elnarians were still rebuilding, still laughing, still free. And in his heart he knew they were, because humans had given them the chance. In the far reaches of space, a monument was built on Elnar, a tall structure made of stone and steel, with both human and Elnarian symbols engraved upon it. At its base were words written in 2 languages that said they came from a distant world, not to rule, but to stand beside us, and when they stood, the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter. And so it was that the galaxy finally understood the truth about humanity, that when their army marched, it was not only a force of war, but a promise that as long as humans lived, no cry for help would go unanswered and no darkness would last forever.